Sophie Carter stared at her phone, her mother's message piercing through her like a cold wind. "We think it's best if you skip Christmas this year," it read. Sophie, 40, had always been the one to host, the one to create magic for the family. But now, for the first time in years, she was being excluded. "For peace," they said. But Sophie wasn't angry, she wasn't upset, she was free. This year she would make her own kind of Christmas, a Christmas for those who truly needed her. And it would be more than enough. Sophie Carter sat motionless, her thumb frozen above her phone. The text from her mother lingered in her mind like a shadow, each word sharp and piercing. "We think it's best if you skip Christmas this year, Sophie. We want a calmer vibe for once." Sophie read it again and again. Each time it felt like the air was being squeezed from her lungs. For 15 years, she had been the one to host the family gathering, the one who spent days preparing, turning her brownstone into a winter wonderland. And now, in one swift moment, she was uninvited. The coldness of the message stung, but it was the absence of a reason that burned the most. She had always given her all to her family. Every Christmas, she meticulously crafted a feast, transformed every room with glittering lights, and ensured that everyone left feeling warm, full, and connected. But this year, that was all being taken away from her, as if her contributions no longer mattered. And for what? Because Matt, her younger brother, was bringing his fiancée, and the family needed peace. Sophie wasn't angry. No, anger wasn't the first thing she felt. It was shock, then confusion, and finally a strange sense of liberation. She had always been the one to please everyone, to give everything of herself in hopes of keeping the family together. But here she was, pushed aside for the sake of calm. What about the joy she had created for them? What about the years she had worked tirelessly to make Christmas special? Her mother's words echoed in her mind, each one slicing through the warmth of her thoughts. "We just want peace, Sophie. You know how worked up you get." Worked up. That's what they called her passion, her enthusiasm, her commitment to making their holidays unforgettable. It was the same word they had used for years to dismiss her. Intense. Sophie placed the phone down on the table, her hand trembling. She stared at the quiet, empty room around her, where the holiday decorations weren't even up yet. It was still early December, but the thoughts of the tree, the homemade ornaments, the ribbons and lights she had always lovingly arranged filled her mind. They were all still there, waiting. But now she didn't feel the excitement she usually did. Instead, there was just an aching emptiness. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. The warmth of her past Christmases seemed so distant now. The voices of family laughing around the table, the joy in their eyes as they admired the tables she'd set, the joy of sharing meals together. It was all slipping away, like sand through her fingers. Sophie had always prided herself on being the glue that held everything together, the one who made sure no one felt left out. But now it seemed that glue had been peeled away. She wasn't needed. Not this year, anyway. Not by the people she had poured her heart into year after year. And yet, despite the sadness, Sophie felt something else creeping in, a feeling of freedom. This year would be different. She wouldn't let herself be defined by their rejection. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to create her own version of Christmas. Sophie stared at the empty chair across from her, the one where her mother used to sit, where she would sip her tea and talk about the old family traditions. It was all slipping away, and yet she felt no sadness, just an overwhelming sense of clarity. Maybe it's time to stop trying to make them happy, she thought to herself. She had given everything for this family, but it always seemed like it was never enough. They were always looking for something simpler, quieter, always asking for peace, while never seeing the value in the chaos of love and joy that she brought into their lives. The house felt still, far too still for someone who had spent years creating life, creating magic in every corner. But today, Sophie felt a strange sense of peace settle in her chest. Maybe she didn't need to continue what they wanted. Maybe she didn't need to follow their rules anymore. This year would be different. With renewed determination, Sophie stood and walked over to her desk, opening a leather-bound notebook that she hadn't touched in months. The pages were filled with past plans for events and grand celebrations, but now the ink would take a different direction. She could still see the twinkling lights and taste the warm smells of spiced cider, but this time it would be for a different kind of celebration. A celebration that would be hers alone. Sophie pulled out her phone, opened her contacts and dialed. The phone rang only once before a voice greeted her. "Jasmine, it's Sophie. I've got a plan." Jasmine, a long-time friend who ran a children's outreach centre in Kensington, had always been someone Sophie could turn to. Over the years, Sophie had donated her time, cooking for charity events, organising parties for children in need. But this year, Sophie needed something bigger, something that would fill the void that was left by her family's abandonment. "I want to host a Christmas dinner for 20 single mothers and their kids right here in my brownstone." She could already see the look of surprise on Jasmine's face through the phone, but Sophie was determined. "I want to do it big, Jasmine. I want to make it magical, just like how I always made it for my family, but this time for the people who truly need it. They're going to leave here with full hearts, not just full stomachs." After a brief pause, Jasmine's voice crackled with excitement. "You're serious, aren't you? That sounds incredible. The kids will love it." Sophie smiled, the warmth returning to her chest. "Yes, I am. And I'm going to make this year unforgettable. For them, for me." Her fingers hovered over the phone as she sent out a message to her followers on Instagram. "Exciting news! This Christmas, Sweet Legacy will host a special holiday dinner for 20 single mothers and their children. We're bringing the magic home." Sophie set her phone down and sighed, feeling a calmness she hadn't expected. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't following the expectations of others. She was following her own. The family would never understand. But she didn't need them to. This was her chance to create something beautiful, something that would fill the void left by their absence. As the plans for her new Christmas vision started to take shape, Sophie felt a fire ignite within her. This was her year to shine, and nothing would stop her from making it perfect for the people who truly mattered. Sophie's home began to transform. What once had been her family's holiday haven was now becoming something new, something that carried the weight of her hopes. She put her heart into every detail. A sugar plum forest in the living room, a North Pole kitchen with gingerbread cookies ready to be decorated, and a gingerbread craft room for the children to let their imaginations run wild. Each room would tell a different story, a different piece of Christmas magic. The house was filled with the buzz of volunteers, and Sophie worked alongside them, carefully crafting the atmosphere she envisioned. Her meticulousness hadn't changed. This was still the Sophie who had spent hours wrapping garlands, hanging ornaments, and baking the perfect pies. But this time, it wasn't for her family. It wasn't for their approval. It was for the children and mothers who were about to experience the warmth and joy that Sophie had always hoped to give. As the day of the event drew closer, Sophie's phone buzzed with messages. The first one was from her mother. "Are you sure this is the right decision, Sophie?" it read. "It's Christmas, and you're not even celebrating with us. Please reconsider." Sophie let out a small sigh, but she didn't respond immediately. She had made her decision. They wanted calm, simplicity, but Sophie knew that her version of peace was different. It wasn't about quiet dinners or bland conversations. It was about giving others the chance to experience something they'd never had. A few minutes later, a text from Thomas popped up. "Mom says you're ignoring her. Are you really going to do this?" Sophie read it slowly, feeling the familiar sting of rejection, but this time she didn't let it stop her. "Yes," she typed back. "I'm really going to do this, and it's going to be wonderful." The hours leading up to the event were a blur of activity. But Sophie felt strangely calm, focused on what she was creating, not what she was leaving behind. The volunteers were hard at work, setting up the cocoa bar, the sparkling wish tree in the corner, and the tables where each child would sit to make holiday crafts. Sophie could hear the laughter of the children who had come to help decorate the rooms, and her heart swelled with warmth. She could already see their faces lighting up as they entered her brownstone. This was what Christmas was about: joy, love, connection. Finally, the day arrived. Sophie stood at the door, greeting the first of the families. The children ran in, their eyes wide with wonder as they took in the lights, the decorations, the magic of it all. It felt like a dream she had created for herself and for them. For the first time in years, Sophie felt like she was truly giving back, not to the family that had cast her aside, but to those who really needed it. As she looked around at the warmth and excitement filling every corner of her home, Sophie realized that maybe, just maybe, this was what Christmas was supposed to be about all along. Not the expectations of a family who didn't understand her, but the simple, profound joy of making others feel seen, loved, and valued. The weeks after the event passed in a blur of joy and contentment. Sophie's brownstone, once a place of Christmas chaos for her family, had become a haven of warmth and happiness for the people who truly needed it. The children had left with full bellies and hearts even fuller. The single mothers had shared their stories, their struggles, and Sophie had listened, offering more than just food and a festive atmosphere. She had given them a piece of her heart, and in return she had received something far more valuable than her family's approval: fulfillment. But as much as Sophie tried to focus on the beauty of what she had done, the messages from her family didn't stop. Her mother had called several times, each voicemail a plea for Sophie to reconsider, to come back, to join them for Christmas dinner. It was almost as if they couldn't accept that Sophie had found peace on her own, away from their expectations. One evening, as Sophie was sitting by the fire, enjoying a quiet moment after another day of work, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Thomas. "Mom says she's sorry. She wants to talk. Can you just come over for dinner tomorrow? Please, it's not the same without you." Sophie paused. She read the message again. Her heart twisted. Her mother's voice, so cold in the beginning, now sounded almost desperate. Was this genuine? Or was this just another attempt to pull her back into their world of rules and limitations? Sophie's fingers hovered over the phone. She could feel the pressure building again, like the weight of years of rejection and judgment were pushing down on her chest. Her eyes drifted to the photos of the event she had posted on social media. The smiling faces of the children, the glowing wish tree, the joy that filled every corner of her home. This was real. This was her reality now. And as much as she loved her family, she couldn't go back to the way things were. She hit reply, her fingers steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "I'm glad you're all thinking of me, but I'm not coming back. I found something here that's real, something I can be proud of. Maybe one day we'll understand each other, but for now, I'm staying where I'm needed." She hit send and immediately felt the weight lift off her shoulders. Sophie wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. But she knew deep down that this was the right choice for her. She had built something beautiful, something that her family had never understood, and maybe, just maybe, they would understand it one day. But for now, she couldn't go back to the empty traditions they clung to. As she placed her phone down, Sophie looked out the window, the soft glow of the streetlights casting a peaceful light on the snow-covered streets. She had made her peace, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like enough. The following days passed quietly for Sophie as she focused on her work and continued to enjoy the company of the people she had met through her charity event. She felt more alive than ever before. The joy and warmth that filled her home every day was something she could never get from her family, not in the way they had expected her to conform. But then, on Christmas Eve, something unexpected happened. Sophie was just finishing up preparations for a small gathering she had planned with some of the mothers from the outreach centre when the doorbell rang. She hadn't been expecting anyone, and yet there they were. Her mother and Thomas, standing at the door, bundled up in their winter coats, their faces drawn with uncertainty. Sophie hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. She had made it clear in her message that she was no longer willing to participate in the family's holiday. But there they were, standing before her. She opened the door slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. Her mother was the first to speak. "Sophie, honey, She paused, glancing nervously at Thomas, who was standing quietly behind her, his hands stuffed into his pockets. "We were wrong," Thomas spoke up, his voice quieter than usual. "Mom's been talking about you non-stop. She doesn't know how to fix this, but we realised we were wrong about you." His words hung in the air, thick with tension. Sophie stared at him, her emotions warring within her. For so long, her family had told her she was too much, too intense. And now here they were, standing on her doorstep, acknowledging the very thing she had always known deep down. She had been more than enough all along. Sophie took a deep breath, her gaze shifting between her mother and brother. "You finally understand?" she asked softly, her voice a mixture of disbelief and hope. Her mother nodded, her face etched with regret. "We've been so caught up in our own expectations. We didn't realise how much you've given, how much you've done for others. We thought we knew what was best for you, but we didn't." There was a brief pause, and Sophie saw her mother's eyes begin to well with tears. "We were wrong. We see that now." Sophie felt a surge of conflicting emotions. On one hand, she felt a sense of vindication, as if everything she had worked for, every effort she had poured into making the holidays special for others, was finally being recognised. On the other hand, the pain of being cast aside for so long, of being made to feel like she wasn't enough, still stung. She didn't say anything for a long moment, the weight of their words sinking in. Finally, Sophie spoke, her voice steady but firm. "It's not about being right or wrong anymore. It's about what I've learned. I don't need your approval. I never did." She looked at them both, feeling the truth of her words settle deep inside her. "I've found my own peace, and while I'm glad you finally see what I've been doing, I'm not going back. This is who I am now." Her mother's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment Sophie thought she might break. But then she steadied herself, giving Sophie a small nod. "We understand, Sophie, we do, and we're sorry for everything." For the first time in years, Sophie felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Acceptance. Not the kind she had been waiting for, the kind that came from her family's approval, but the kind that came from her own heart. She smiled softly, stepping aside to let them in. "Come in," she said gently. "It's Christmas Eve. You're welcome here." As they entered her home, Sophie realised something important. This was her family now, not the one that had abandoned her, but the one she had created on her own, with love, compassion, and a whole lot of heart. As Sophie led her mother and Thomas into the living room, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the past few weeks lift just a little. The room was warm, the fireplace crackling softly, and the tree she had spent hours decorating stood proudly in the corner. There were small touches of magic everywhere, the cinnamon-scented candles, the handmade ornaments hanging from the branches, and the twinkling fairy lights that brought the entire room to life. This was the Christmas Sophie had made for herself, and as much as she had tried to close the door on her past, the presence of her family felt like a full-circle moment. Her mother, though visibly emotional, looked around the room with a mix of awe and regret. "Sophie, this is incredible," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "You've done more than we ever realised." Her mother took a slow step toward the glowing wish tree in the corner, where small handwritten notes hung from delicate branches. "I never saw it like this." I thought you were just trying too hard, but now I see what you've created." Sophie swallowed, the familiar sting of those old criticisms still lingering, but she didn't let it cloud her. It wasn't about trying hard, Mom. It was about trying to give something real, something that mattered. She paused, watching her mother slowly reach up to touch one of the ornaments. "I don't need your approval, but I wanted you to understand why I do what I do." Thomas, who had been quietly standing by the door, shifted his weight uncomfortably. He had never been one for long talks, and the weight of this moment seemed to settle on him as well. "I don't think I ever realized how much this meant to you," he admitted, his voice low. "I've always been caught up in my own world. I guess I didn't see how much you were giving, Sophie. I'm sorry." Sophie nodded, her eyes softening as she watched him. It wasn't easy for Thomas to admit when he was wrong, but something in the way he stood there, vulnerable and sincere, told her he had truly understood. "It's okay, Thomas. I'm not asking for an apology. I just wanted you to see me, to see what I've been doing." For a long moment, there was only the quiet hum of the house, the flickering of the fire, and the sound of distant laughter from the children who had stayed behind to help with cleanup. Sophie felt an unexpected sense of peace settle over her. This wasn't the perfect family reunion she had once envisioned, but it was real. It was raw. It was genuine. Her mother stepped toward her, and Sophie instinctively wrapped her arms around her. It wasn't the kind of embrace she had been waiting for, but it was the one that mattered most, one built on understanding and acceptance. "I see you now, Sophie," her mother whispered, the weight of her years of silence coming to light. "I'm so proud of you. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand, but I see the beauty in everything you've done." Sophie closed her eyes, absorbing her mother's words. For years, she had carried the burden of trying to prove her worth, trying to make them proud. But now, in this moment, she realized that her worth didn't come from their validation. It came from the love she gave, from the life she created, and from the people who saw her for who she truly was. The room filled with the soft hum of Christmas music, and as Sophie pulled back from her mother's embrace, she saw her brother's hand stretched out toward her, a small but genuine smile on his face. "Can we start over?" he asked, his voice hesitant but hopeful. Sophie looked at him, at her mother, and at the warmth of the space around them. Maybe this wasn't the perfect Christmas, but it was the start of something new, something better. And in that moment, that was all that mattered. She smiled softly and took his hand. "Yeah, I think we can." Christmas passed by in a quiet hum of change. Sophie's brownstone, once filled with the chatter and laughter of a family that never fully understood her, had become a place of healing, connection, and new beginnings. The warmth of the families she'd invited, the love that bloomed in every room, and the joy of watching children play and craft together had brought her a sense of peace she had never expected. Her family's visit on Christmas Eve had left her with mixed emotions. The conversation had been emotional, raw, and for the first time in years, real. There was no pretense, no hidden agenda, just the simple truth. They had seen her, and she, in turn, had seen them. Sophie's heart was not hardened by their absence, nor was it filled with the bitterness she had once carried. Instead, it was full of an acceptance she had never felt before, a peace that had come from understanding that her happiness no longer depended on their approval. Over the following days, Sophie worked tirelessly to finalise her plans for the outreach programme she had envisioned. She continued hosting small gatherings at her home, each one filled with love, laughter, and food. But now there was something different. She had a newfound sense of purpose, and it wasn't just about charity anymore. It was about creating space for people to be themselves, without judgment, without expectations. One afternoon, as she was preparing for the next event, her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Sophie, we've been talking. We'd like to help with your next event. Maybe we could bring something to the table, literally and figuratively." Sophie smiled at the message. Her mother and Thomas were trying, and that in itself was enough. It wasn't about forcing things back to how they once were. It was about creating a new dynamic, one built on mutual respect and understanding. Sophie felt a surge of gratitude. They were making an effort, and that effort, no matter how small, meant the world to her. The next day, her mother and Thomas arrived at Sophie's house with a basket of freshly baked bread and homemade jams. They hesitated at the door, unsure of their welcome, but Sophie opened it with a smile, gesturing for them to come inside. "You're here," she said simply, her voice warm. "Come in." As they sat down together, sharing stories and laughter as they worked to prepare the meal for the next event, Sophie realized that something had shifted. The family she had been longing for, the one that had always been just out of reach, was no longer the one she had to fight for. The family she had created in the people she cared about, in the children and mothers who needed her, was more real than anything she had ever experienced. Sophie looked at her mother, her heart swelling with a mix of love and contentment. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice full of gratitude. "I don't need perfection. I just need the truth. And this feels like the truth." Her mother nodded, her eyes filled with unspoken emotion. "I know, Sophie, and we're here. For you, for this new life you're building." Sophie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything she had carried for so long begin to lift. She wasn't just hosting Christmas dinners anymore. She was creating a legacy of love, one that would be felt for years to come. This was her truth. This was her family. As the days passed and the year began to wind down, Sophie felt an unexpected sense of fulfillment, something that had eluded her for so long. The Christmas event had marked a turning point for her. It was no longer just about the lavish dinners or the perfect decor. It was about creating real, lasting memories for people who needed to feel seen. The outreach programs, the moments of connection, and the joy of simply being in the presence of others were filling her heart in ways her family never had. Christmas came and went without the big family gathering Sophie had once expected. But what came instead was something far more beautiful. Her phone buzzed once again, this time with a message from Thomas. "Mom and I are thinking of doing something different this year. We'd like to host a family dinner. Not perfect, just real." Sophie stared at the message, her heart swelling with a mixture of surprise and quiet joy. For the first time, it felt like her family was moving toward the kind of connection she had always wanted. They had come so far, from the dismissive judgments of the past to a real, open conversation about what mattered. Sophie didn't need grand gestures. She didn't need an apology from her mother or a perfect family dinner. She just needed this, a simple step forward, and they were finally taking it. That night, as Sophie set her table for the dinner with her outreach guests, she thought about the people she had helped, the lives she had touched, and the life she was building for herself. The warm, golden glow of the candlelight reflected in her eyes as she set the last plate in place. There was magic in the air, not the kind that came from perfect decorations, but the kind that came from the hearts of those who shared it. Later, as Sophie prepared to attend the family dinner, she reflected on just how far she had come. No longer did she feel like the outsider, the one who tried too hard to please. No longer did she feel the sting of rejection. Sophie had built her own happiness, and now, perhaps for the first time, she could open the door to a new kind of family. The dinner with her family was simple, no elaborate decorations or gourmet dishes, but it was filled with genuine conversations, laughter, and understanding. Sophie sat at the table, looking at her mother and Thomas, feeling the quiet warmth that had been missing for so long. There was no need for perfection, no need for pretense. This was real. This was family. As the night drew to a close, Sophie looked around at the faces of her family, at the families she had helped, and at the community she had built.
It wasn't about traditions. It wasn't about being accepted by others. It was about the love, the kindness, and the legacy she was creating, one small gesture at a time. Sophie smiled, a sense of peace washing over her. This was her new tradition. This was her new Christmas. The new year brought with it a sense of renewal, but Sophie wasn't ready to let go of the lessons she had learned during the holiday season. Her home remained a place of warmth, laughter, and giving, and as January rolled in, she found herself more focused than ever on her mission. The outreach program had grown, and more families reached out to her for support. What had started as a small, personal endeavour had become something much bigger than she had ever anticipated. Sophie found herself spending her days coordinating events, working closely with volunteers, and building partnerships with local businesses to provide better opportunities for those in need. She had become an advocate for single mothers and their children, creating a platform for them to feel heard and valued. And the more she gave, the more she realised that the true magic of life wasn't in the glitz and glamour of perfect holiday gatherings, but in the ability to make a difference in the lives of others. One evening, as she sat at her desk, carefully reviewing plans for an upcoming event, her phone rang. It was her mother. Sophie's heart fluttered unexpectedly, but she picked up with a steady breath. "Hi, Mum," she greeted gently. There was a brief pause before her mother's voice came through, a little quieter than usual. "Sophie, I've been thinking a lot. We've talked about how we can help more, and I think we want to do something bigger with you. You've inspired us." Sophie's heart warmed. She had always believed in her family, despite their flaws. She had never wanted them to be perfect. She had only wanted them to be real, and now they were. "What do you have in mind?" she asked, curious but hopeful. Her mother continued, "We want to sponsor a holiday event for families in need this year, a bigger one than ever before. We're not just talking about a dinner, but an entire day of celebration, gifts, meals, activities. You've created something incredible, and now we want to help make it bigger. We want to be a part of it." Sophie took a deep breath, her eyes closing for a moment as the weight of her mother's words settled in. She hadn't expected this. "Mum, that sounds amazing," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. For years she had hoped for this moment, but now, as it was happening, it felt even more profound than she could have imagined. Her mother continued, "We're in this together now, Sophie. We want to show you that we've learned from you. You've changed us, and we're ready to help you change more lives." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. For so long, she had felt like she was alone in her mission, fighting for approval from a family that didn't understand. But now, they were standing with her. They had joined her in the fight, and for the first time she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "Thank you, Mum," Sophie whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for finally seeing me. We'll make this bigger than anything I could have done alone." As she ended the call, Sophie felt a deep sense of fulfillment settle over her. She had built a legacy, one that was growing, evolving, and impacting the lives of those who needed it most. It wasn't about the family she had once hoped would understand her. It was about the family she had created through love, kindness, and unwavering commitment. The next chapter of Sophie's life had begun, and she was ready for everything it would bring. This was her purpose. This was her new beginning. As spring blossomed, Sophie found herself swept up in the growing momentum of her new life. The outreach program was expanding rapidly, and the partnerships with local businesses and volunteers were flourishing. The initial vision she had, one born out of her own need to create something meaningful, had turned into a community-wide effort that was truly changing lives. Sophie realised that her work, which had once been a quiet dream, was now the beating heart of something larger than she could have ever imagined. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages, emails, and updates from the many people who had become part of her cause. The message was always the same: "You're making a difference, thank you." But Sophie had learned something along the way. She wasn't doing this for the praise or recognition.
She was doing it because she had discovered her own purpose, one that filled her with a sense of fulfillment she had never found before. One afternoon, while Sophie was organising the logistics for an upcoming event, she got another call from her mother. "Sophie, we've been talking again." Her mother's voice sounded hesitant but also filled with warmth. "We were thinking of expanding the event to include more families, maybe even some local schools. What do you think?" Sophie smiled softly as she thought about her mother's words. The same woman who had once told her she was doing too much, the same person who had questioned her every move, was now asking her opinion on how to make their community outreach even bigger. It was incredible to witness how much had changed in such a short amount of time. "That sounds amazing," Sophie replied, feeling the familiar rush of excitement fill her chest. "I think it would be great to include more people. Let's do it." And so the plans grew even larger. Sophie, her mother, and Thomas worked together to organise an event that would provide gifts, food, and fun activities for families in need. What started as a small act of kindness had now become a community-wide initiative that reached hundreds of people. For Sophie, the change was profound. Not only had she created a legacy of kindness, but she had also transformed her own relationship with her family. The walls that had once separated them were slowly crumbling, brick by brick. Every step forward, every new partnership, every life that was touched felt like a piece of the puzzle falling into place. Her home was filled with joy and laughter as volunteers came and went, preparing for the next big event. Sophie often found herself pausing to look around and reflect on how far she had come. The sense of pride she felt now was not about what others thought of her, but about the difference she was making in the world. She was no longer defined by her family's rejection. She was no longer the person who needed their approval. She had built something far more powerful, a community that supported each other and lifted each other up. As the event approached, Sophie could feel the excitement building. She had never imagined that her desire to create something beautiful would lead her to this point, creating a family, a life, and a community that were all centered around the values she held most dear: love, kindness, and the power of connection. Sophie stood by the window, watching as the sun set over the horizon. The future was unfolding before her, and she knew with certainty that this was only the beginning of something even greater. The day of the event arrived with the kind of quiet anticipation that only comes from weeks of careful planning. Sophie's heart raced as she walked through the now bustling space in her brownstone, the familiar hum of excitement filling the air. Volunteers were setting up tables laden with gifts, preparing meals, and ensuring that everything was in place for the families who would soon walk through her door. Sophie had envisioned a day of joy and connection, a day where no one would feel alone or forgotten. It wasn't about the extravagance or the perfect display. It was about bringing people together, about creating a space where everyone felt valued and loved. And as she looked around at the smiling faces of volunteers, the same faces she had come to know over the past few months, Sophie felt a deep sense of pride in everything she had created. As the first families began to arrive, Sophie felt a rush of warmth flood through her. Children ran to the crafts table, their laughter filling the room as they created ornaments and decorations. Mothers chatted together, exchanging stories and bonding over the simple joy of being surrounded by people who truly cared. For a moment, Sophie closed her eyes and let the sounds wash over her. This was it. This was what Christmas was meant to be about. This was the real magic. Later that afternoon, as Sophie made her way through the crowd, offering smiles and checking in with everyone, she saw her mother and Thomas in the corner, chatting with a group of volunteers. For a moment, Sophie felt a pang of emotion. It wasn't perfect, this Christmas, but it was real. And it was everything she had hoped for. Her mother caught her eye and smiled warmly, her face lit with pride. "You've done it, Sophie. This is what you've always been meant to do. I'm so proud of you." Sophie's heart swelled. For so long, she had fought for validation from her family, only to realize that the most important validation came from within. She had spent years trying to prove her worth, but now she understood that her worth was never in question. It was about what she had given to others, what she had created, and how she had built something meaningful, something that truly mattered. As the day went on, Sophie saw the joy on the faces of the families who had walked through her doors. They were not just guests, they were a part of something bigger, something more significant. They were a part of a community built on kindness, on giving, on love. Sophie had created that, and in doing so, she had created a new definition of family. By the end of the day, as the last guests departed and the house settled into a peaceful quiet, Sophie sat down on the couch, exhausted but content. Her phone buzzed with messages of thanks and gratitude, but Sophie didn't need them. The warmth in her heart was enough. She had built something beautiful from the ground up, and she knew this was just the beginning. For the first time in years, Sophie didn't feel like she was chasing something. She had found what she was meant to do. She had found peace, not from her family's approval, but from the love and support she had created with her own hands. She didn't need to prove herself anymore. The life she had built was more than enough. The future was bright, and Sophie knew there was still so much more to do. She had a legacy to build, and this was only the beginning. As the new year unfolded, Sophie felt the winds of change blowing stronger than ever. What had started as a small vision, a way to heal from the pain of family rejection, had now become a cornerstone of her life. The outreach program was thriving, and the partnerships she had forged over the months were blossoming into something far bigger than she had imagined. More families reached out for help, and the local community rallied around her efforts. People who had once been strangers were now a part of the ever-growing family she had created. Her phone was filled with messages of support and gratitude, and Sophie couldn't help but smile at each one. The world had begun to notice what she was doing. What was once a quiet, personal dream was now a movement. But Sophie knew that none of this would have been possible without the people who believed in her, and, perhaps more importantly, without the belief she had found in herself. One evening, as Sophie was reviewing plans for an upcoming event, her phone rang again. This time, it was from a local news station. "Sophie, we'd love to feature your story in our upcoming special on community leaders. Would you be open to an interview?" The excitement in the reporter's voice was palpable. Sophie's mind raced. She had never sought out the spotlight, never craved the recognition that came with fame. But this was different. This wasn't about her. It was about the impact she was making, about inspiring others to do the same. "Of course," she replied, her voice steady, though a spark of nerves lit up inside her. "I'd be honoured." The interview was scheduled, and soon Sophie found herself sitting in front of a camera, sharing her story with a wider audience. She spoke about the pain of feeling like an outsider in her own family, about the journey of turning that hurt into something meaningful, and about the community that had embraced her and supported her vision. It wasn't an easy story to tell, but Sophie realised, as she spoke, that it was the story she needed to tell. As the interview wrapped up, the reporter thanked her and assured her that the segment would be featured prominently. Sophie left the studio that day feeling a mix of emotions, pride, excitement, and a little bit of uncertainty. This was a new chapter in her life, one that was not only about giving back, but about sharing her message with others, about showing them that it was possible to overcome pain and build something beautiful from it. Back at home, Sophie found herself reflecting on everything she had accomplished. The business, the outreach programs, the partnerships, none of it had come easily. But each obstacle, each moment of doubt, had only fueled her resolve to keep moving forward. She had created something real, something that mattered. As the days passed, Sophie continued to pour herself into her work. But now there was a different energy about her. She wasn't just leading a community, she was becoming a beacon of hope for others. The legacy she had been building brick by brick, was taking shape in ways she couldn't have imagined. And though her family was still a work in progress, Sophie felt more connected to herself than ever before. She had found her place in the world not by clinging to old expectations, but by embracing who she was and the impact she could make. For the first time in her life, Sophie felt free. And that freedom, along with the love and support she had cultivated, was worth more than any family's approval. She was living her truth, and in doing so, she was helping others find theirs. As spring began to paint the world with vibrant colours, Sophie found herself stepping into a future she had once only dreamed of. The success of the outreach programs and the events she had organised had spread throughout the community, reaching people far beyond what she had ever imagined. The recognition she had received, particularly from the local news feature, had only solidified her place as a community leader, someone who had turned personal pain into purpose and passion. But Sophie knew that success was not about the accolades or recognition. It was about the impact she could continue to make, the lives she could touch. She had learned that the true measure of success wasn't in the applause, but in the quiet moments of change that happened behind the scenes. For every child who had been able to make a wish and see it come true, for every mother who had felt seen and supported, for every volunteer who had found a sense of belonging, those were the real rewards. Sophie stood by her window one evening, watching as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting a golden hue over the city. The world was changing, and so was she. The foundation she had built over the past year had become more than just an event planner's dream. It was a lifeline for many. Sophie's role had evolved from simply hosting a few dinners to becoming a force of change in her community. Her phone buzzed again, and Sophie looked down to find an email from a well-known non-profit organisation that had been following her work. They wanted to partner with her to expand the outreach programs to neighbouring cities. They saw in her the potential to reach even more families and provide them with the resources and support they so desperately needed. Sophie felt a thrill of excitement run through her as she read the email. This was exactly the kind of opportunity she had been waiting for, a chance to grow, to expand, and to make a difference on a much larger scale. She had always dreamed of helping people, but now she was being given the chance to do it on a national level. With steady hands, Sophie typed out a response, agreeing to the partnership. She knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter. It wasn't about the fame or the success. It was about how far she could take this, how many more lives she could touch. She had spent so much time trying to be accepted by her family, but now she was focused on the people who truly needed her, the ones whose lives would be forever changed by her commitment. The next day, as Sophie sat down with her team to discuss the details of the expansion, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. It had been a long, winding road to get here, and there had been moments of doubt and uncertainty. But she had persevered, and now she was surrounded by a team of people who believed in her vision and her mission. Sophie wasn't just planning events anymore. She was creating a movement. And as the plans for the next phase of the outreach program took shape, Sophie realized that the real journey was only just beginning. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt, but for the first time she felt truly prepared to face them. The future was open, limitless, and filled with possibility. Sophie wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. She had found her purpose, and with that, there was nothing she couldn't do. As summer approached, Sophie found herself stepping into a new rhythm. The outreach program she had started was no longer just a passion project. It was now an essential part of her life, something that had grown into a network of support, love, and community that spanned far beyond her brownstone. She had become a beacon of hope for many, and her efforts were being noticed on a much broader scale. She was no longer just the woman who hosted extravagant Christmas dinners. She was now the founder of a movement that was changing lives, one small act of kindness at a time. But with this new chapter came new challenges. The scale of the outreach program was expanding rapidly, and Sophie had to learn to balance her growing responsibilities with her personal life.
There were moments when the weight of it all felt overwhelming. The late nights of planning, the endless calls, the logistics. There were days when she questioned whether she was doing enough. But then she would receive a message from a mother whose child had received a gift, or a volunteer who shared how the program had impacted their life, and the exhaustion would fade, replaced by a sense of purpose that could never be shaken. Sophie had always been someone who believed in the power of community, in the ability to make a difference, no matter how small the act. She had learned that nothing was truly impossible if you had the right people beside you. And now, more than ever, she was surrounded by a team of dedicated individuals who shared her vision and commitment. Together, they were building something that was bigger than all of them, something that would continue to grow long after they were gone. One afternoon, as Sophie sat in her office, reviewing the plans for the upcoming event, her phone rang. It was from her mother. Sophie's heart gave a small leap, but she steadied herself before answering. The call was brief, but meaningful. "Sophie, I just wanted to let you know how proud I am of you. We're all behind you now, and I think we're ready to do even more together." Her mother's voice was warm, the tone completely different from the coldness of the past. "We've been talking, and Thomas and I want to help expand the program even further. Let's make this a national effort." Sophie was silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of her mother's words. There had been a time when she had craved this kind of approval, when she had longed for her family to recognize the work she had done. But now, as she heard the sincerity in her mother's voice, Sophie realized something. She had already built her own sense of self-worth, independent of their approval. This moment, this gesture of support, was a bonus, not the foundation of her happiness. "That sounds incredible," Sophie replied, her voice steady with conviction. "I couldn't do it without you. Let's make it happen." As she hung up the phone, Sophie felt a sense of peace wash over her. The years of uncertainty, of trying to fit into a mold that wasn't hers, were behind her. The woman she had become was built on the foundation of her own strength and determination. She had found her calling, her purpose, and it was more fulfilling than she had ever imagined. With her mother and brother now fully on board, Sophie felt the pieces of her life falling into place. The family that had once rejected her was now the family that supported her dreams. Together, they would take the program to new heights, reaching families and children in cities far beyond their own. Sophie had come a long way, but the future, her future, was wide open, and she knew that the best was yet to come. With the newfound partnership between her family and the outreach program, Sophie felt a sense of momentum building that she couldn't ignore. She had spent years trying to find her place, but now everything seemed to be aligning. The events she had always dreamed of were coming to life in ways she hadn't imagined. As the program continued to grow, Sophie saw the faces of people, families, children, volunteers, whose lives were changing because of the work she had started. She could feel the winds of change on the horizon, not just in her own life, but in the world around her. The outreach program was becoming something much bigger than a local effort. Sophie and her family, now fully committed to the cause, began to reach out to other cities, expanding their mission. It wasn't just about giving gifts or food anymore, it was about creating a culture of care, compassion, and community. In the months that followed, Sophie spent much of her time travelling, meeting with partners, and overseeing the growth of the program. It was exhausting, but each new connection, each new partnership fueled her drive. The work was fulfilling, but it was also demanding. Sophie's personal life, the quiet evenings she used to cherish, had become rare. But there was a contentment in that busyness, a satisfaction in knowing that her efforts were shaping something larger than herself. One day, as she sat in a coffee shop reviewing a proposal for an upcoming collaboration, her phone buzzed. It was a text from her mother. "We're proud of everything you've done, Sophie. I never imagined this would be possible when we first started talking. I don't think you realise how many people you've helped, how many lives you've changed.
Sophie paused for a moment, letting her mother's words sink in. She had spent so much time seeking her family's approval, but now she realized something profound. The change she had created was not only for the people she helped, but for herself as well. Her relationship with her family had transformed, slowly but surely. The resentment that had once festered between them had dissolved into understanding. Her mother, Thomas, and even her extended family had become active supporters of her vision. They were no longer just passive observers, they were contributors, partners in the mission Sophie had started. She responded to her mother's text. "Thank you, I never could have done this without you, but we're just getting started." As the days passed, Sophie continued to make her mark in the world. She didn't need the applause or the recognition anymore. She had found something more valuable, something deeper than external validation. She had found her purpose, and that purpose was to make a lasting impact in the lives of those who needed it most. The future was brighter than she had ever imagined. With her family by her side, Sophie had everything she needed to continue building the legacy of care and compassion she had always dreamed of. She wasn't just creating an event or an organization. She was creating a movement, one that would continue to grow and evolve long after she was gone. As Sophie stood at the edge of this new chapter, she felt a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. The journey had not been easy, but it had been worth it. And now, with her family's support and the commitment of a community that believed in her, Sophie knew that anything was possible. She wasn't just shaping a better world for others, she was shaping a better world for herself too. As the seasons changed, Sophie's life continued to evolve in ways she had never imagined. The outreach program was thriving, expanding into new cities and communities, and Sophie's role had grown from a passionate volunteer to a respected leader. She was now recognized not only for her tireless work, but for her ability to inspire others to take action, to make a difference. The program had become a movement, one that resonated deeply with people from all walks of life. But even as her success grew, Sophie felt a shift in herself. She had been so focused on the mission, on making an impact, that she hadn't given much thought to her personal life. The quiet moments she once cherished had become few and far between. Yet in the whirlwind of her success, she didn't feel regret. She had discovered a new sense of purpose, one that fueled her every day. The days were long, filled with meetings, phone calls, and endless planning, but Sophie never lost sight of the reason behind it all. She wasn't just organising events or securing donations, she was building something that would last, a legacy that would outlive her, a network of love and support for families who needed it most. One evening, as she sat on the balcony of her brownstone looking out at the skyline, Sophie reflected on how far she had come. From the lonely moments of feeling excluded by her family to the overwhelming realization that her worth was never defined by anyone else's approval, she had come full circle. Her phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a call from her mother, and Sophie's heart warmed at the sound of her voice. "Sophie, we've been talking again," her mother began, a tone of excitement in her voice. "We want to take this even further. We're planning a national campaign to raise awareness for the work you've been doing. This is something we're all in together." Sophie's heart swelled with gratitude. For years, she had longed for her family to truly understand her, to be there for her, and now they were. They weren't just passive participants, they were fully invested alongside her in making a difference. It was more than she had ever hoped for.
"I can't believe this," Sophie said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is everything I've wanted and more." Her mother continued, "We know how much this means to you, Sophie. You've inspired us all. We want to be part of this, to help you reach even more families, to do more good." Sophie's eyes welled with tears. She had found her purpose, her voice, and with it, a family that supported her. The journey she had once thought would be a lonely one had become the most rewarding path of her life. As the conversation ended, Sophie felt an overwhelming sense of pride. She wasn't just creating a program, she was creating a movement. And with the support of the people who mattered most, her family, her community, and the people she had touched, She knew she could continue making an even greater impact. The future felt limitless now, full of possibility. The road ahead was long, but Sophie was no longer afraid. She had already come so far, and with each step, she was building something that would last far beyond her lifetime. She wasn't just making a difference, she was shaping the future. And that, Sophie realized, was the greatest gift of all. The days turned into weeks, and Sophie found herself at the helm of something far bigger than she had ever imagined. The national campaign her family had suggested was officially underway, and the impact was immediate. Cities across the country began to take notice of the work Sophie was doing, and her message of love, care, and community was spreading faster than ever before. Her outreach program wasn't just a local effort anymore. It had become a beacon of hope for families in need, reaching thousands instead of hundreds. Sophie sat in her office one morning looking over the campaign materials. There was a new energy in her, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. The weight of the responsibility was heavy at times, but it wasn't a burden. It was a call to action, one that Sophie was ready for. She had spent years building this, and now she was about to see it grow into something she couldn't have fathomed when she first started. Her phone buzzed, snapping her back to the present. It was a text from her mother. "We're ready. Let's meet and finalise everything for the launch. This is going to change lives, Sophie. We're so proud of you." Sophie smiled as she typed back a quick reply. "Can't wait. Let's make it happen." The feeling of pride that welled up inside her was overwhelming. She had once felt like the outsider, the one who didn't belong, and now she was leading the way for something that would make a real difference. Her family had gone from questioning her every move to fully supporting her, standing beside her as she reached for something greater than any of them had imagined. As the launch event approached, Sophie couldn't help but feel the full weight of what she was about to embark on. The program had already touched so many lives, but now it was about to reach even more. She was ready. She had always been ready, even if she hadn't known it at first. The evening before the launch, Sophie stood on the balcony of her brownstone, watching the city lights twinkle below. It felt surreal. This moment, this life she had built. She had worked so hard to get here, to create something real and meaningful. She had been rejected, overlooked and misunderstood. But now she was here, standing on the edge of something extraordinary. Sophie's phone buzzed again, this time a call from Thomas. "Are you nervous?" he asked, his voice light but full of concern. Sophie paused for a moment, thinking about the road that had brought her here. "Not nervous, just ready. This is what I've been working for, Thomas. I'm not afraid anymore. I know this is going to change lives." She could hear the smile in his voice. "You've already changed so many. You're going to do amazing things, Sophie. We're all behind you." Sophie took a deep breath and let it out slowly. She had always worked alone, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. But now she had her family by her side. They weren't just her family, they were her partners, her supporters, and together they were unstoppable. The next morning, as she stepped onto the stage for the launch event, Sophie felt the excitement bubble up inside her. The crowd, filled with volunteers, supporters and families, cheered as she took the mic. Sophie smiled, looking out at the faces that had been a part of her journey. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady and strong. "Thank you for believing in this. Thank you for showing up. This is just the beginning, and together we are going to change lives, one step at a time." As the crowd erupted in applause, Sophie realized something profound. She wasn't alone anymore. This wasn't just her journey. It was everyone's journey. And together they were going to make the world a better place, one act of kindness at a time. The future stretched before her, full of endless possibilities, and Sophie was ready to embrace it all. The launch event was a resounding success. The energy in the room was palpable, and Sophie felt an overwhelming sense of pride as she looked around at the volunteers, the families, and the countless supporters who had come together to make the day possible. For the first time in a long time, she felt like everything had come full circle. What had started as a personal mission to heal from the rejection of her family had grown into a community movement, one that was now being embraced by people from all walks of life. Sophie stood backstage, watching the event unfold with a quiet smile on her face. It was a feeling she had never experienced before, a deep satisfaction that came not from the applause or the accolades, but from knowing that her work was truly making a difference in the lives of those who needed it the most. She wasn't just changing lives, she was helping people change their own. As the event went on, Sophie received messages and texts from friends, family, and supporters. Her mother had sent a long message. "I'm so proud of you. We never imagined this would grow into something like this. You've done it, Sophie." Sophie felt a lump form in her throat as she read the words. It wasn't about her mother's pride. It was about the fact that they were finally on the same page, finally supporting each other. The distance that had once been there, the coldness that had defined their relationship, was no longer present. It had been replaced with something far more meaningful: understanding. Thomas also reached out, his text filled with excitement. "This is just the beginning. Let's take it to the next level. We're with you every step of the way." Sophie had dreamed of hearing those words for so long, but she never imagined it would come to this. Her family, once distant and dismissive of her efforts, had now become her partners in this mission. The walls that had stood between them had come down, and in their place was a shared vision, a shared desire to make the world a better place. Sophie's heart swelled with gratitude as she realized how much things had changed. As the event drew to a close, Sophie found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The long hours, the sleepless nights, the doubts, every part of it had been worth it. She had turned the pain of rejection into something powerful, something that not only healed her, but helped heal others as well. Sophie was no longer the woman who was defined by the need for approval. She had created her own path, and it was one filled with purpose. As the final moments of the event unfolded, Sophie walked onto the stage to thank everyone who had made it possible. She looked out over the crowd, the faces of those whose lives had been touched by her efforts. "This isn't just my journey," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This is all of ours. Together, we're creating something that will last, and together we'll continue to make a difference every day." The crowd erupted in applause, and Sophie knew, without a doubt, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. This was her new beginning, one built on love, compassion, and the unwavering belief that one person can truly make a difference. For the first time, Sophie felt completely at peace. Her journey was far from over, but she had found a place in the world where she belonged, where her heart could soar and her work could shine. The future was hers to shape, and she was ready to build it, one step at a time. With the success of the launch still fresh in her mind, Sophie entered a new phase of her life. The outreach program was now a full-fledged movement, supported by her family, the local community, and many others who had been touched by her message. But Sophie knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead was long and there was so much more to do. She had seen firsthand the impact she could make, but now she wanted to make sure that the momentum would continue, that the seeds of change she had planted would grow into something far greater than she had ever envisioned. The emails and calls poured in, the support was overwhelming, and Sophie felt the weight of it all, not as a burden but as a responsibility she was ready to embrace. More cities wanted to partner with her program, and the demand for events and resources continued to rise. Sophie didn't shy away from it. She embraced it, knowing that with each new partnership, more lives would be touched, more people would have access to the help and support they needed. She began hiring a team to help manage the growing initiative, ensuring that everything was organised and running smoothly. Sophie had never considered herself a businesswoman, but she quickly learned the skills necessary to expand her vision. She leaned on her family for support, and they were right beside her every step of the way. Thomas, who had always been there for her, became more involved, helping with logistics and outreach. Her mother, once so unsure of Sophie's dreams, now worked tirelessly alongside her,
helping coordinate events and raise awareness. But even with all the progress, Sophie still found herself reflecting on the journey. There were moments when she felt the weight of the expectations on her shoulders, when she questioned whether she could keep up with the pace of everything. Yet when she saw the faces of the people her work was helping, when she saw the children's eyes light up at a Christmas gift they had never imagined receiving, Sophie knew there was no turning back. One day, as she was walking through the event space, checking on the final details for an upcoming gathering, she paused to take a breath. The room was filled with laughter, the hum of excited chatter, and the sound of children's voices as they painted and created holiday crafts. Sophie stood quietly, observing it all. She had created this. This was the life she had built with her own hands, and it was everything she had ever wanted. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to find a message from her mother. "Sophie, we've made a decision. We want to help take this even further. We're thinking of turning this into a non-profit. We can't do this alone, but together we can make it even bigger." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. This was the next step, the one she had always hoped for but never expected so soon. Turning the outreach program into a non-profit would allow them to scale, to reach more families, and to continue the work they had started. It was the next logical step in their journey, and Sophie was more than ready for it. She typed back immediately, "Let's do it, together." In that moment, Sophie knew that the future was not just hers, it was everyone's. She had created something powerful, something that would live on for generations. With the support of her family, her community, and all the people who believed in her mission, she was ready to face whatever came next. The world was open to her, and Sophie was more determined than ever to make it a better place. This was her purpose, her calling, and she knew the best was yet to come. The decision to turn the outreach program into a non-profit organisation was a game changer for Sophie. It was the realisation of a dream she had carried for years, one that had started in the quiet corners of her mind and blossomed into something powerful. Now, with the foundation laid, she could finally take the program to new heights. The future was bright, and Sophie felt a renewed sense of purpose that surged through her like a wave of energy. The first step was setting up the non-profit infrastructure, forming a board of directors, applying for 501c3 status, and developing a sustainable model to ensure the program could continue to grow without losing its soul. Sophie found herself knee-deep in meetings with lawyers, accountants, and experts who could guide her through the intricacies of non-profit management. It was a new world for her, one that was as intimidating as it was exciting. But Sophie had always thrived in the face of challenges. She dove headfirst into the logistics, not shying away from the hard work. As the non-profit took shape, she could feel the shift. The walls that had once seemed insurmountable were starting to crumble. Sophie was no longer just organising small events. She was building an empire of compassion, a network that would stretch far beyond her wildest dreams. Her family, now fully on board, was instrumental in the process. Thomas helped with the outreach and strategic partnerships, leveraging his business acumen to forge relationships with sponsors and donors. Her mother, whose belief in Sophie had only grown over the years, took charge of coordinating volunteers and managing community engagement. They were no longer just supporting her from the sidelines, they were all in. Sophie was still the heart of the operation, but she no longer carried the weight alone. The team was growing, and each person added their own unique strength to the mission. They all shared the same vision: to reach as many families as possible, to provide support, love, and resources, and to create a community where no one ever had to feel invisible again. One afternoon, as Sophie was reviewing the latest financials and looking at the projections for the next year, she paused. A sense of overwhelming pride washed over her. This wasn't just a program anymore, it was a movement. And it wasn't just hers, it was theirs. The entire community had rallied behind it, had seen the value in what they were doing, and had chosen to be part of it. The phone buzzed with another message. It was from Jasmine, one of her closest friends and a key partner in the outreach efforts. "Sophie, this is incredible. I just got off the phone with the city council. They want to host an event in your honour. You've done something amazing. People are talking and they're seeing the difference you've made." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. The recognition wasn't important to her, but the fact that people were noticing and taking action meant that the mission was succeeding. They were creating change, real, tangible change. That evening, as she sat at her desk reflecting on how far they had come, Sophie felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still so many challenges ahead, but she knew they were headed in the right direction. The growth of the program was only just beginning, and with every new family they helped, every child who received a gift, and every mother who felt supported, the movement gained more power. Sophie wasn't just building a non-profit. She was building a legacy that would continue long after she was gone, one built on love, community, and the unshakable belief that together anything was possible. With the non-profit now established and the outreach program expanding to new cities, Sophie found herself stepping into a role she had never anticipated. The dream she had started on her own was now being shared by a growing team of people who believed in the mission as much as she did. The road ahead was clear, but the weight of creating a sustainable future for the program was ever present. Sophie had already achieved so much, but she knew that building something truly lasting required careful planning, innovation, and a relentless drive to make it better. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her mother. "Sophie, I've been thinking about the next steps. How do we make this last? How do we keep it growing without losing the heart of what you've built?" Sophie smiled at the message. This was the question she had been grappling with for weeks. It wasn't enough to just have a successful year or a successful campaign. It was about creating something that could endure. She responded quickly. "We need to make sure we're not just expanding for the sake of expansion. We need to focus on quality, relationships, and sustainable practices. We can't just rely on donations. We need to build a model that empowers the communities we serve to be self-sustaining." Her mother's reply was immediate. "I agree. Let's start looking at ways we can build community leadership within the program. If we create local leaders who are invested in their own communities, it will make everything stronger and more resilient." The idea resonated deeply with Sophie. She had always believed that real change started from within, from the grassroots level. It wasn't enough to just give people what they needed. She wanted to empower them to be a part of the solution, to be leaders in their own right. Sophie knew that this would be the key to long-term success. She began working with her team to create leadership development programs within the communities they served. Volunteers would be trained not just to help with events, but to become ambassadors of the movement in their own cities. They would learn how to fundraise, how to coordinate events, and how to bring people together to make a difference. The goal was to build a network of empowered individuals who could carry the mission forward long after Sophie and her family were no longer at the helm. It wasn't just about helping people, it was about giving them the tools to help themselves and others. Sophie envisioned a future where each city and community had its own leaders, each empowered to continue the work in their own way. They would be the backbone of the movement, ensuring that it would continue to thrive no matter what challenges lay ahead. As the year continued, Sophie's focus shifted. She spent less time at the front of the room and more time mentoring the leaders she had identified. She worked alongside them, sharing what she had learned, helping them refine their skills, and encouraging them to take ownership of the program in their own cities. She saw in them the same passion and drive that had once driven her, and she knew that this was the key to creating a future that would endure. In the quiet moments, Sophie would look at the progress they had made and feel a deep sense of pride. The journey had been long and difficult, but they had created something that was bigger than any one person. It wasn't just about what she had done, it was about what they were all doing together. Sophie had built a foundation for a sustainable future, one where communities could stand on their own, empowered to take care of each other. She had turned her dream into a movement, and now it was no longer just hers, it was theirs. And as she watched the leaders she had nurtured step into their roles, Sophie knew that this was just the beginning. The future was brighter than she had ever imagined. She had created something lasting, something that would continue to grow and evolve for generations to come.